Today, I would like to talk to you about two of my favorite books that I think some of you might enjoy. The two books I have chosen are fantasy novels for readers 15 and upward, but could be read by anyone with the determination to try. The first book I'd like to introduce and talk about is The Name of the Wind. The Name of the Wind was written by Patrick Rothfuss and published in 2007. It is the first in another trilogy of books called The Kingkiller Chronicles, of which the last is still yet to be released. I first read the book when I was in high school, but it could certainly be read by middle schoolers as well. Some have said that this book is akin to Harry Potter. While it is much more like Harry Potter than Lord of the Rings or other books of that nature, the book has a much different attitude and tone than Harry Potter does. Patrick Rothfuss, like J.K. Rowling, is certainly one of the great fantasy writers of the 21st century, though. The book, told in both first and third person in two different timelines, which makes for a very interesting story, follows a young kid named Kvothe. Kvothe and his family are in a traveling troupe that goes from place to place, which is common for his people. He meets an old man on his travels, and his name is Ben. Ben teaches him about the Alar and about sympathy. These are forms of magic in the world that Kvothe lives in. Then, after some traumatic events, Kvothe goes his own way, where he must live a poor and unforgiving life. He learns about the world but Kvothe plays the lute in his free time as a method to make money. The lute was an instrument that his father gives him, and he cherishes it dearly. And with his lute, he makes friends throughout the story, while going on to be a musician. Then he hears of the legendary university. He knows that he wants to go there and be a student. He wants to learn the names of all the things in the world, but he specifically wants to know the name of the wind. If a person knows the true names of things, they can command and twist their nature. Kvothe must struggle with finding friends, learning about a new environment, the university, and even understand and confront his enemies. All the while, Kvothe is trying to get into the university, to become a student, his ultimate dream. Now, I'd like to read an excerpt from The Name of the Wind, in where we are at the beginning of the book. It was night again. The Waystone Inn lay in silence, and it was a silence of 3 parts. The most obvious part was a hollow, echoing quiet, made by things that were lacking. If there had been a wind, it would have sighed through the trees, set the inn's sign creaking on its hooks, and brushed the silence down the road like trailing autumn leaves. If there had been a crowd, even a handful of men inside the inn, they would have filled the silence with conversation and laughter, the clatter and clamor one expects from a drinking house during the dark hours of night. If there had been music, but no, of course, there was no music. In fact, there was none of these things, and so the silence remained. Inside the Waystone Inn, a pair of men huddled at one corner of the bar. They drank with quiet determination, avoiding serious discussions of troubling news. In doing this, they added a small, sullen silence to the larger, hollow one, and made an alloy of sorts, a counterpoint. The third silence was not an easy thing to notice. If you listened for an hour, you might begin to feel it in the wooden floor underfoot and in the rough, splintering barrels behind the bar. It was in the weight of the black stone hearth that held the heat of a long-dead fire. It was in the slow back and forth of a white linen cloth rubbing along the grain of the bar. And it was in the hands of the man who stood there, polishing a stretch of mahogany that already gleamed in the lamplight. The man had true red hair, red as flame. His eyes were dark and distant, and he moved with the subtle certainty that comes from knowing many things. The Waystone Inn was his, just as the third silence was his. This was appropriate, as it was the greatest silence of the 3, wrapping the others inside itself. It was deep and wide as autumn's ending. It was heavy as a great river-smooth stone. It was the patient cut-flower sound of a man who is waiting to die. The book is riveting from start to finish. There are a few books that I can't put down, but this one is definitely one of them. It is a great entry into a really awesome world with interesting and new characters and magic. The author and his writing is really easy to engage with, and he does a great job in weaving an intricate, detailed, and really interesting narrative. I recommend it to all readers with the determination to try, but more specifically to people in high school, as I find it might suit their interests and reading ability better. Secondly, I'd like to tell you about The Fellowship of the Ring. The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, was written by J.R.R. Tolkien. He is considered by many to be the father of modern fantasy. He wrote the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which consists of The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and The Return of the King. He also wrote The Hobbit, which is a prequel to The Fellowship of the Ring and to the Lord of the Rings trilogy as a whole. The Fellowship of the Ring was published in 1954, 27 years before Tolkien's passing away. The book takes place in Middle-earth, a part of the world where dwarves, elves, humans, and hobbits struggle against the evil of the world. The Dark Lord Sauron, who once threatened to control the world, has now been destroyed, save for his One Ring. The One Ring contains his life force. Now, Sauron gathers his armies in order to cover all the land in a second darkness. In The Hobbit, Bilbo Baggins, Frodo Baggins' uncle, finds the ring. Now, in the Fellowship of the Ring, the burden of the ring falls upon Frodo Baggins, a hobbit overshadowed by his uncle's great adventures to slay a dragon. Gandalf the Wizard urges Frodo, after some time, to make his way to Rivendell, a magical place protected by elves and elven magic. There, after much heated debate, a fellowship of 9 is formed. 2 men, Boromir and Aragorn, a dwarf, Gimli, an elf, Legolas, Gandalf, and 4 hobbits, Frodo, Samwise Gamgee, Merry, and Pippin, who set out to destroy the ring in the fires. On Frodo's adventures, he meets magical forest folk, living trees, goblins, orcs, elves, mythical civilizations, and ancient demons. I will now read an excerpt from the book, The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. "Hold it up," said Gandalf, "and look closely." As Frodo did so, he now saw fine lines, finer than the finest pen strokes, running along the ring, outside and inside, lines of fire that seemed to form the letters of a flowing script. They shone piercingly bright, and yet remote, as if out of a great depth. "I cannot read the fiery letters," said Frodo in a quavering voice. "No," said Gandalf, "but I can. The letters are Elvish, of an ancient mode, but the language is that of Mordor, which I will not utter here. But this is the common tongue, is what is said, close enough. One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them." It is only 2 lines of a verse, long known in elven lore. He paused, and then said slowly in a deep voice, "This is the Master Ring, the one ring to rule them all. This is the one ring that he lost many ages ago, to the great weakening of his power. He greatly desires it, but he must not get it." Frodo sat silent and motionless. Fear seemed to stretch out a vast hand like a dark cloud rising in the east and looming up to engulf him. "This ring?" he stammered. How on earth did it come to me?" Now, being fairly young, as most of you are, I saw the movie version first. I thoroughly enjoyed them, but looking back, I really wish I would have read the books first. These books are a delight in themselves alone. After reading it, it is always fun to go back to see the movies and see what they left out and kept. As always, the movie can't fit everything in the books, so you always pick up some new and interesting things. But most importantly, The Fellowship of the Ring, along with the rest of the trilogy, is the backbone of pretty much all modern fantasy, including the other book I talked about, The Name of the Wind, which was heavily inspired by Tolkien. The book is filled with magical and fantastical adventures, as well as a truly immersive and real world, filled with interesting cultures and languages. Nearly every time I read this book, I find new and interesting things that catch my eye. There is so much great detail contained in this book, which is another reason to read it, even if you have already seen the movies. This book is one of a kind, and I recommend it to all of you interested in adventure, fantasy, or even just a place to put your eyes and escape to another world.